They called the boy Monster because of his facial paralysis. But that day, when the millionaire father went to pick him up from school, he saw something that stopped time. His new nanny, a simple woman, facing the bullying of the classmates alone, and what he did seconds later made everyone hold their breath. The morning sun streamed through the tall kitchen windows, a spectacle of light that made the white marble floor gleam like a mirror. Everything in it breathed perfection, from the porcelain cups lined up with mathematical precision to the aroma of fresh bread that hung in the air, a promise of comfort and affection. At the center of this immaculate scene, Leah, at 5 years old with eyes that held all the world's sweetness, watched the bread on the table, the steam rising in small, invisible waves. A shy smile bloomed on her lips as she extended a small hand, her fingers hesitant, wanting just a piece of that morning, a fragment of that warmth that seemed to belong to everyone but her. She wanted a taste of home. But the smile on Veronica's face, the woman before her, was like a sudden frost on a spring day. It froze the room, the warmth, the hope. "Bread is only for those who can walk," she said, her voice a thread of ice, as she dragged the plate away from the girl's reach. The sound of the bread, deliberately knocked to the floor, reverberated through the kitchen with the force of a slap. It was a dull, final thud that shattered the silence and Leah's heart. The girl looked at the fallen food, scattered across the cold marble, as if looking at a reflection of herself. Broken, discarded. Slowly, supporting herself on her fragile hands, she began to drag herself across the floor. A low, almost inaudible whimper escaped her lips, for she had already learned in the hardest way that her tears only served to irritate. Veronica watched the scene with calculated coldness, her posture impeccable in her silk dress. "If you want to eat, get up and get it," she repeated, each word a small push into the abyss of humiliation. What she didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that in the doorway, Arthur was standing, motionless, silent, like a statue of grief. His eyes, which had so often analyzed complex stock market charts and closed multi-million-dollar deals, were now fixed on the small figure of his daughter. He saw her effort, the dignity in her attempt to move, and felt the weight of his entire fortune turn to nothing. His entire net worth, built to provide security for his family, seemed like a cruel joke at that moment. What was the point of all his money if he couldn't buy a single piece of bread for his own daughter? The image of Leah dragging herself toward the discarded food was a dagger plunging into his chest, twisting slowly. He tasted the bitter sting of guilt, a guilt that grief for his wife had made him swallow for 3 long years, believing that silence was a form of peace. Now he understood. It wasn't peace. It was complicity. The woman he believed he had rescued from his loneliness was the same one now pushing his daughter into darkness. His gaze was a mixture of disbelief and a despair so profound it left him breathless. In that moment, the successful entrepreneur, the man whose word moved capital and influenced markets, felt like the smallest of men. He remained there, hidden by the shadow of the doorway, and a decision as cold as the marble beneath his daughter's knees began to form in his mind. He wouldn't make a scene. Not yet. First, he needed to understand the full extent of the monster he had brought into his home. Silence, which had once been his refuge, would now become his weapon. In the days that followed, the Sterling household took on the normality of a well-rehearsed play. Dinners continued to be served on fine porcelain plates, with Veronica discoursing on her charity projects and the importance of philanthropy to the city's elite. She smiled at Arthur over her crystal wineglass, a smile that once seemed like a safe harbor and now revealed itself to be a mask of ice. Leah began to eat separately, at a small table in the breakfast nook, under the justification that it was so as not to disrupt the visual harmony of the dining room. The excuse was so absurd, so cruelly aesthetic, that Arthur felt the bitter taste of bile rise in his throat. He, however, agreed with a nod, the first of many performances he would have to stage. Every smile he returned to Veronica, every trivial conversation about business or the profitability of his portfolio was an act of silent warfare. The grief for his late wife, which for 3 years had made him a reclusive and emotionally absent man, now transformed into a piercing guilt. He had taken refuge in his work, in expanding his assets, believing that building an empire of goods and wealth was the only way to protect Leah. What a fool he had been. The image of his daughter dragging herself across the floor replayed in his mind every night, a silent film that kept him from sleeping. It wasn't an isolated outburst from Veronica, he now knew. It was a pattern, a methodical cruelty hidden beneath layers of refinement and good manners. The peace he so prized was, in fact, a lie he had told himself to avoid facing the inconvenient truth of his own failure as a father. On Wednesday, Janusz, he took the first step. He hired the city's top security firm. With our business volume growing and our net worth becoming more visible, it's a necessary precaution, he explained to Veronica over breakfast. He spoke about the importance of protecting their assets, about market instability, and the need to safeguard what they had built. She listened attentively, her eyes shining with approval. The idea of having the most secure house in the gated community, a veritable fortress of wealth, fed her vanity. She didn't see the true intention behind the discreet lenses that would be installed in every room. To her, they were just another status symbol, a testament to their success. As the technicians worked, running wires and fixing tiny, nearly invisible cameras in the corners of the walls, Arthur watched Clara, the housekeeper, a simple woman with a downcast gaze and restrained gestures who seemed to shrink whenever Veronica entered a room. He had never truly noticed her before, but now he saw her in a new light. He saw the fear in her eyes, the way she hurried to answer her employer's calls, as if she feared something more than a simple reprimand. The house, once a symbol of his achievement, of his immense capital, now revealed itself to be a prison with golden walls. A prison for his daughter, and perhaps for others too. By the end of the day, the technicians were gone. Silence reigned again, but it was a different kind of silence. Now, the house had eyes. Arthur sat in his study, the monitor before him split into multiple squares, each showing a piece of his life. The immaculate kitchen, the sumptuous living room, the long and silent hallway, and Leah's room. He looked at the image of his daughter sleeping, so small and vulnerable in her bed. What would these cameras reveal? He felt a chill run down his spine, a mixture of fear and determination. Fear of the truth he was about to discover, and the determination that, no matter the cost, this would be the last week of his daughter's suffering. The wait for the first images was a silent torture, the prelude to a storm he himself was summoning. The first night of surveillance was the longest of Arthur's life. Sitting in the dim light of his office, the glow of the security screens casting dancing shadows on his face, he felt like a stranger in his own home. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the computer and the frantic beating of his own heart. Each monitor displayed a scene of domestic tranquility, the empty kitchen, the dark living room, the garden bathed in moonlight. It was the picture of peace, the same peace he had strived so hard to maintain. But now he knew it was a farce, a thin shell covering something rotten. He navigated through the previous day's recordings, the rapid movements of the mouse echoing his anxiety. Hours of normality unfolded before his eyes. Veronica on the phone, laughing at something a friend said. Leah sitting on the living room rug, drawing in her notebook. Clara moving efficiently through the house, cleaning and organizing. For a moment, a flickering spark of hope tried to ignite. What if he had misread the bread scene? What if it was an unfortunate moment, an isolated slip on a bad day? The human mind has an impressive capacity to seek refuge in denial, and Arthur, for a second, desperately wanted to be wrong. Then he found it. The recording was from the playroom, a colorful, cheerful space he had designed for Leah himself. The camera, positioned in the upper corner, captured the entire room. Veronica entered with her daughter, holding Leah's favorite rag doll, the one with blue yarn hair that the girl wouldn't sleep without. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, Veronica placed the doll on the highest shelf, well beyond the child's reach. "Come on, sweetie, a little exercise to strengthen those little arms," she said, her voice a sweet and venomous syrup that the camera's crystal-clear audio picked up perfectly. Arthur watched, paralyzed, as Leah tried. She stretched, stood on her tiptoes, her little arms trembling with the useless effort. The cry came low, frustrated, accompanied by silent sobs. "You can do it, darling. Just try a little harder," Veronica insisted, without moving a muscle to help. And that's when Arthur saw it. On his wife's face, as she watched his daughter struggle, there was no encouragement. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible smile, a glint of cruel satisfaction in her eyes. It was the pleasure of power, the delight of watching a defenseless person suffer. The air seemed to be sucked from Arthur's lungs. He felt a coldness spread through his spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Something inside him, the last particle of trust he still held for that woman, shattered into 1,000 pieces. His entire fortune, the rising stock charts on Wall Street, the wealth he accumulated thinking of Leah's future, all seemed to dissolve into ash. What good was it to be a giant in the business world if he was a moral dwarf in his own home? Guilt hit him with the force of a punch. He had been blind, deaf, absent. He had handed his daughter, the most precious gift his late wife had entrusted to him, into the hands of a torturer disguised as an angel. He replayed the scene once, twice, 3 times, as if to punish himself with the sight of that cruelty. On the 4th viewing, his detail-oriented eyes caught something new. At the edge of the frame, for a fraction of a second, Clara's figure appeared in the doorway. She watched the scene, her face a mask of anguish and helplessness, before quickly retreating into the darkness of the hall. She had seen, she knew, and the fear on her face told Arthur that this was not the first time. The next day dawned grey, as if the sky were mourning Arthur's lost innocence. He hadn't slept. He spent the night awake, alternating between the icy rage that consumed him and the waves of guilt that drowned him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Veronica's cruel smile and Leah's futile struggle. On his computer screen, stock market charts blinked in green and red, figures representing the growth of his capital, but which now seemed empty, meaningless. He was a man who had built a fortune from nothing, a multimillionaire whose business intuition was legendary. Yet he had been unable to see the darkness that had settled in his own home. The irony was crushing. He could predict the fluctuations of the stock market, but he couldn't see the suffering in his own daughter's eyes. He needed to speak with Clara. He knew the approach had to be delicate. The woman was clearly terrified of Veronica. One wrong move and she would shut down forever, taking any chance of help with her. He waited for the perfect opportunity. It came mid-morning, when Veronica left for one of her charity committee meetings, a social event. She used to polish her public image as a benefactor. Arthur found Clara in the greenhouse at the back of the garden, a place of glass and silence where she tended to his late wife's rare orchids. The air there was warm and humid, filled with the scent of earth and flowers. Clara had her back to him, misting water on the leaves of a plant with a gentleness that contrasted with the tension in her shoulders. "Clara," he said, his voice lower than he intended. She startled, dropping the spray bottle with a dull thud on the stone floor. Her eyes widened in panic when she saw him. "Mr. Sterling, I didn't hear you come in. Do you need anything?" The question was formal, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. "I need your help," he said, getting straight to the point, but in a gentle tone. "I know what happens in this house when I'm not around. I saw you yesterday at the playroom door." The color drained from Clara's face. She opened her mouth to deny, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Her lips trembled. "Please," Arthur continued, stepping forward, "I'm not blaming you. I am the only one to blame here. I was blind, absent, but that ends today. I need to know how long this has been going on." Silent tears began to roll down the woman's face. She shook her head, fear warring with anguish in her eyes. "Sir, I can't. She said if I said anything, she'd throw me out. I need this job. I have family." "I know," Arthur interrupted her, his voice firm but full of empathy. "You are not going to lose your job. I give you my word. More than that, I will ensure that you and your family never have to worry about money again. My net worth is more than enough to guarantee it, but I need you to help me protect Leah." The mention of the girl's name seemed to break Clara's last barrier of resistance. The once silent crying now came in ragged sobs. "It's been a long time, sir, since she first arrived," she confessed, her voice choked. "I tried to say something once. When she left the girl without dinner because she couldn't tie her own shoes, she threatened me, said she'd make sure I never got a job anywhere ever again." Arthur felt the rage rise again but forced it down. He had to remain calm. "I believe you, Clara, and I am so sorry I didn't see it sooner." Clara wiped her tears with the back of her hand. She glanced around as if the glass walls had ears. Then, with a quick movement, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small object. I recorded a few things with my phone when I thought no one was looking. I saved them here. I didn't know what to do with it. I was scared." She held out a trembling hand, offering him a small flash drive. Arthur took it, the cool plastic against his skin. It was a tiny, almost weightless object, but he felt as if he were holding a time bomb. What else would he discover on that small device? What else had his daughter endured in his silence? Arthur's office, once a sanctuary of power and success, had transformed into a self-imposed torture chamber. With Clara's flash drive plugged into his laptop, he opened a folder containing a handful of short video files shot from improvised angles, shaky from a hand trying to hide. They were fragments of a reality he had refused to see. The first video showed Leah sitting on the kitchen floor, while Veronica ate a piece of chocolate cake in front of her, describing in detail the sweetness of the frosting and the softness of the sponge. "This is for little girls who obey quickly," she would say, and Leah would just watch, her eyes large and hungry. In another, Veronica accidentally spilled a glass of ice water on the drawing Leah had spent all morning coloring, laughing and saying, "Oh, how clumsy of me." Each file was a stab to his conscience. He saw his daughter ignored, humiliated, and psychologically tormented in ways his mind could never have conceived. The cruelty wasn't physical, but it left far deeper scars. It was the systematic annihilation of a child's self-worth. In the following days, Arthur plunged into a dangerous game of appearances. To Veronica, he was the same attentive husband, discussing plans for their summer vacation and complimenting her dinners, but inside, he was a man at war. The emotional distance between them grew with each passing hour, a chasm of contempt that he masked with smiles and talk about his company's cash flow. He felt dirty, complicit. Every laugh he shared with her, every casual touch, was a betrayal of himself and his daughter. Veronica, sensing a subtle coldness she couldn't identify, redoubled her efforts to charm him. She became more affectionate, more seductive, using her entire arsenal of charm to pull him back into her orbit. One evening, as they sat in the living room, she snuggled up beside him on the sofa, her hand on his arm. "Arthur, darling," "You seem so distant lately," she said, her voice a worried whisper. "Is it stress from work? You know you can tell me anything. Sometimes I feel like you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, trying to grow that fortune even more when we already have everything we could ever want. Don't let the pressure of the stock market or your crypto investments pull you away from us." For a moment, Arthur wavered. The woman beside him was the same one who had helped him out of the fog of grief, the same one who had brought laughter back into this silent house. Was it possible he was overreacting, that his pain and guilt were distorting his perception? The part of him that longed for peace, for a return to normalcy, desperately wanted to believe her. He almost gave in, almost confessed his anguish, hoping she might offer an explanation, an apology, anything that could fix the broken world around him. But then in the morning, reality slapped him with brutal force. He came down to the kitchen earlier than usual and found Leah alone. She was sitting at her little table, her back to the door, and didn't hear him approach. She was holding a small paper napkin with a delicacy disproportionate to her age, with furtive movements like a frightened little animal. She was hiding pieces of her bread inside the folded napkin, nervously glancing around every few seconds. When the napkin was full, she carefully tucked it into the pocket of her little dress. The image destroyed him. His daughter, the heiress to a fortune valued in the hundreds of millions, was hiding food to eat later, afraid it would be taken from her. She was living with a scarcity mindset in a house that overflowed with abundance. That small gesture, so simple and so devastating, annihilated any shred of doubt he might have had. Hesitation turned into a steel-like certainty. There would be no more wavering, no more vain hopes for redemption. War had been declared, and he would use all his power, all his wealth, and all his intelligence to win it. The stage for the final battle was being set, and he would be the director of this dark play. The house, once a symbol of Arthur's success, a testament to his ability to turn ideas into fortune, now felt like a mausoleum. Every luxury object, every piece of art on the wall, every crystal chandelier reflected the coldness that had settled in his heart. The marble of the staircase, once a path to his family's chambers, was now a frigid border separating him from the woman who shared his roof. The clinking of cutlery during meals, once a pleasant accompaniment to light conversation, now sounded like a judge's gavel sentencing his failure. The atmosphere was charged with an unspoken tension, a dense silence that weighed more than any shout. Veronica sensed the shift, though she couldn't understand it. She saw the distance in Arthur's eyes, a shadow her charm couldn't dispel. In response, she clung even tighter to her public persona, as if the external brilliance could compensate for the darkness growing within their home. In the meantime, Arthur began to move in the shadows, using the same discretion and strategic planning he applied to his biggest investments. He contacted his most trusted lawyer, a man who had known him since the start of his career, and brought him up to speed on everything, showing him the videos. The lawyer, a grey-haired man of a usually impassive demeanor, watched the footage with a look of growing horror. Together, they began to map out a plan. This wasn't just about divorcing Veronica. It was about ensuring the truth came out in a way that would prevent her from continuing as a social predator, using her philanthropic image to deceive everyone. The perfect opportunity arose in the form of a gilded invitation left on the hall table. It was for the community's grand annual charity gala, the most anticipated event for the local elite. It was the night when fortunes were displayed, deals were closed over glasses of champagne, and appearances were everything. For Veronica, it was the perfect stage to shine, the pinnacle of her social calendar. For Arthur, it would be the stage for his justice. While Veronica planned her dress and her speech on the importance of helping the less fortunate, Arthur planned her downfall. He felt a pang of something resembling cruelty, but pushed it away. This wasn't revenge, it was protection. It was the only way to ensure his daughter was safe and that no one else would be fooled by that facade of kindness. As the date of the gala approached, Arthur took an even bolder step. In absolute secrecy, he assembled a small team of experts, lawyers, child psychologists, marketing consultants, and began to shape a project born from the pain of seeing his daughter drag herself across the floor. It would be a foundation dedicated to supporting children with disabilities and motor difficulties, providing resources, therapy, and, above all, dignity. The name came to him clearly and powerfully: the Wings of Bread, a tribute to his little Leah's resilience. He dedicated a significant portion of his capital to launch the foundation, transforming his pain and guilt into something constructive. The work on the foundation became his refuge, the only thing that kept him from exploding and confronting Veronica before the time was right. Every document he signed, every plan he approved, was a step toward redemption. Leah, with the keen intuition of children, felt the change in the air. She didn't understand the tension between the adults, but she felt a new presence in her father. He spent more time with her, reading stories before bed, watching her draw with a silent intensity that comforted her. One afternoon, as Arthur watched her, she picked up a colored pencil and began to scribble in her notebook. When she finished, she showed him the drawing. It was a loaf of bread, round and fluffy, with two large wings sprouting from its sides. "What's this, my love?" Arthur asked, his heart tight. Leah looked at the drawing and then at him, her eyes serious and deep. "It's for when the bread wants to fly," she said, with the impeccable logic of a 5-year-old, "for the people who can't get to it." In that moment, Arthur knew, with a certainty that transcended any market analysis or profit projection, that he was on the right path. Those small wax wings drawn by his daughter were the fuel he needed to see this through to the end. Only 2 days remained until the charity gala. The tension in the Sterling house was almost palpable, a static electricity that made the skin prickle. Arthur moved like a predator in his own cage, the plan meticulously laid out in his mind, each step rehearsed to exhaustion. He and Clara had become a silent pair of conspirators, communicating with discreet looks and gestures. The woman's loyalty was his only anchor in a world that seemed to have turned upside down. She had become his eyes and ears inside the house, while he, from his office, was the brain of the operation. Everything seemed under control. However, on the night before the event, a corrosive doubt began to torment Arthur. The evidence he had was devastating, yes, but it showed Veronica's cruelty in isolated acts. He knew her skill with words, her ability to twist reality and play the victim. She could claim stress, a lapse in judgment, and a part of that superficial society would be inclined to believe her. To forgive in the name of maintaining appearances, he needed something more. He needed proof of premeditation, something that showed her actions weren't impulses, but part of a conscious plan to undermine his daughter. He remembered the journal Veronica kept, a black leather-bound notebook she kept locked in her desk drawer in her private study, a room that was the sanctuary of her public image, where she organized her charity events. If there was a record of her true feelings, it would be there. He called Clara to the kitchen, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I need one last thing, Clara, the most dangerous of all." He explained what he wanted. The woman's face went pale. "Sir, that place, she keeps it locked, and the key, she carries it with her." Arthur had already thought of that. "I have a copy. I had one made a long time ago for an emergency." He handed her the small metal key. "She's out for her final dress fitting and then going to a spa. She'll be gone for at least 3 hours. It's more than enough time." Clara was trembling, but she nodded. The courage she found for Leah's sake was greater than her fear. Arthur sat before his monitors, his stomach churning. He watched Clara enter Veronica's study, a ghost in enemy territory. The room's camera showed a cold, impersonal space, organized with surgical precision. Clara went straight to the desk, opened the drawer with the copy key, and took the journal. She was about to leave when Arthur saw it. On the screen showing the front of the house, the gate opened. Veronica's car was pulling in, far earlier than expected. "Get out of there, Clara, now," he whispered at the screen. A useless, impotent god. He sent a text message, but it was too late. The sound of the key in the front door echoed through the house. In a panic, Clara looked around. There was no time to get out. The only place to hide was a built-in cabinet against the wall, where Veronica stored materials for her projects. Clara squeezed inside, pulling the door shut with a soft click, seconds before Veronica entered her own study. Arthur watched, holding his breath, his heart pumping an icy fear through his veins. Veronica stopped in the middle of the room. She seemed restless, sniffing the air like an animal sensing a strange presence in its territory. She looked at her desk, her eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, she began to walk toward the cabinet. To Arthur, each of her steps was a hammer blow to his chest. Veronica stopped in front of the cabinet door. She stood in silence for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Then she reached out, and her fingers touched the latch. Arthur's world shrank to the grainy image on the monitor. He watched Veronica's hand, her long, elegant fingers hovering over the cabinet latch, a sentence suspended in midair. Inside that dark, airless space, he could imagine Clara's panic, the sound of her own muffled breath roaring like thunder in her ears. The entire operation, his chance for Leah's justice, was one click away from disaster. If Clara were discovered, all would be lost. Veronica would not only fire her but destroy her. And Arthur would lose his only witness and ally. The victim image he planned to deconstruct would be replaced by that of a paranoid, controlling husband. He was powerless, a billionaire chained to his chair, able to move markets with a phone call, but unable to stop a door from opening. At the exact moment Veronica's fingers began to turn the latch, the phone on her desk rang, a shrill sound that sliced through the tension like a knife. Veronica hesitated, her hand frozen in the air. The phone rang again, insistent. She cast one last suspicious glance at the cabinet and then turned to answer it. "Hello," she said, her voice slightly irritated by the interruption. Arthur let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. On the other end of the line was the voice of his lawyer, following the contingency plan they had set for an emergency. "Mrs. Sterling, I apologize for bothering you at home," said Mr. Davies, his voice calm and professional. "But I need an urgent confirmation from Mr. Sterling regarding an overseas fund transfer. It's an investment in euros that cannot wait. He's not answering his cell." Veronica sighed, her annoyance evident. "He's in his office, as always. I'll get him." She put the phone down and walked out, her suspicion momentarily forgotten in favor of the financial urgencies she so valued. On the monitor, Arthur saw Clara slip out of the cabinet, her face pale and beaded with sweat. She moved quickly, placing the journal on top of the desk and exiting the study, closing the door behind her. Moments later, Veronica knocked on Arthur's office door. "Your lawyer is on the phone. Something about euros and urgency," she said, without coming in. "Thank you, darling. I'll take it now," he replied, keeping his voice as steady as possible. He waited for her to walk away and then picked up the journal Clara had discreetly left on his doorstep. He opened the leather-bound book, his hands trembling slightly. The pages were filled with Veronica's elegant, slanted script. There were notes about dinners, guest lists, ideas for charity events. But hidden among the records of her perfect social life were the notes he was looking for. They were short, venomous passages that revealed the depth of her contempt. L was particularly irritating today. "Her slowness is an embarrassment to me. How could Arthur produce something so imperfect? She is a smudge on the picture I am trying to paint." On another page, "I must be firmer. Her weakness reflects on me. If she cannot walk, she must learn to be invisible. It is the only way to maintain our status." and the most devastating of all, dated just a few weeks after their wedding. He still sees her as a piece of Helen. I need to sever that connection. The emotional inheritance is as dangerous as the financial one. She must become a liability, not an asset, in his mind. Arthur felt a chill in his soul. It wasn't impulsive cruelty. It was a plan, a deliberate project to erase the memory of his first wife, to isolate Leah, and to consolidate her own power within the family and the fortune. She didn't see Leah as a child, but as a competitor, a flaw in her design for a perfect life. He closed the journal. The last piece of the puzzle was in his hands. Now, he didn't just have proof of abuse, he had proof of intent. Justice, he thought, wouldn't just be about exposing what she did, but about revealing who she truly was. The morning of the charity gala arrived with a brilliant sun that seemed to mock the darkness gathering inside the Sterling mansion. To the outside world, it was just another day in the life of a privileged family. The prelude to a night of glamour and philanthropy. But for Arthur, every hour was a countdown, every interaction with Veronica a dangerous dance across a minefield. She was euphoric, moving through the house like a queen preparing for her coronation. She supervised the final details of her dress, rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror, and spoke on the phone with infectious excitement about the importance of giving back to the community. Arthur watched her, a silent spectator to his own tragedy, and her duplicity disgusted him. How could someone inhabit two such different realities so effortlessly? The woman who meticulously planned the humiliation of a child was the same one who would be applauded that night for her supposed generosity. While Veronica busied herself with preparations for her big night, Arthur focused on his own. Locked in his office, he finalized the launch details for the Wings of Bread Foundation. He video-conferenced with his team, approved the final website design, and reviewed the press release that would be sent to every major news outlet in the country at precisely 9 o'clock at the height of the event. He was transforming his net worth, once a mere accumulation of figures, interest and dividends, into a tool for change. Every dollar invested in the foundation was an act of redemption, an attempt to balance the scales of his own negligence. He felt a feverish urgency, as if he were building an ark to save his daughter and himself from the flood of lies that had inundated their lives. In the middle of the afternoon, Leah sought him out in his office. She came in silently, as she always did, and stood beside his chair, holding her drawing pad. "Daddy," she whispered. Arthur turned, his heart clenching at the seriousness in her childish eyes. "What is it, my angel?" She opened the pad to a new page. There was a drawing of two figures, one large and one small, holding hands. The large figure wore a crown, and the small one had a pair of wings. "This is us," she said, pointing to the drawing. "You're the king, and I can fly." Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. He pulled her onto his lap, hugging her tightly, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair. "Yes, my love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You can fly, and I will never again let anyone try to clip your wings." In that moment, Leah rested her head on his chest, a gesture of trust he felt he didn't deserve but accepted as a gift. She seemed to sense the approaching storm and was seeking shelter in him. And he, for the first time in a long time, felt truly like a father, a protector, not just a provider of wealth, but a safe harbor. The interaction with his daughter solidified his resolve. Any fear he might have had about the public scandal, about the exposure of his family, evaporated. The only thing that mattered was the truth. The honor of his late wife, the dignity of his daughter, and his own moral integrity were on the line. Looking at the drawing, he realized Leah's innocent genius. The bread with wings wasn't just a child's fantasy. It was a powerful symbol. It represented the idea that sustenance, care, and love should be accessible to all, especially the most vulnerable. They should fly to those who cannot reach them. It was a message so simple and so profound that he decided to incorporate it into his own speech. His daughter's voice, through her drawings, would be his most powerful weapon that night. The purity of her vision would be the perfect counterpoint to Veronica's calculated cruelty. The night would not be about humiliation, he decided. It would be about truth and the hope that is born from it. Night fell on the luxury-gated community like a dark velvet cloak sprinkled with diamonds. Imported cars glided silently down the tree-lined streets, depositing their elegantly dressed passengers at the entrance to the ballroom. The air vibrated with the sound of restrained laughter, the clinking of jewelry, and the soft melody of a string quartet. The ballroom was stunning, a sea of golden light reflecting off crystal glasses and silver cutlery. It was the pinnacle of the culture of appearances, a world where success was measured in carats and a person's worth was proportional to their ability to maintain composure. Arthur felt like an actor stepping onto the stage for the final act of a play he hadn't chosen but needed to finish. He adjusted his tie, the silk tight around his neck, and offered his arm to Veronica. She was radiant. She wore a scarlet-red gown that hugged her curves perfectly. Her hair swept into a sophisticated updo that highlighted the diamond earrings on her lobes. She smiled and waved at acquaintances, the very picture of grace and confidence. No one could imagine the darkness that hid beneath that luminous facade. "You're quiet, darling," she murmured, squeezing his arm. "Is everything all right?" "Just thinking," he replied, his voice neutral, "about the speech I'm going to make." A flicker of surprise crossed her eyes. "You're making a speech, but I prepared a few words." "It will be brief," he said, "just an important announcement about a new social investment I'm making." The mention of social investment seemed to soothe her. She likely thought it was another generous check for some institution, which would only enhance the family name's prestige. They took their seats at the head table, a place of honor in the center of the room. Arthur felt the eyes on them. They were the perfect couple, the discreet billionaire and his socialite wife, a union of fortune and beauty. He exchanged pleasantries with business leaders, politicians, and high society figures, each smile a mask, each handshake an effort of self-control. He saw the president of the Homeowners Association, a man whose friendship Veronica had assiduously cultivated, make his way to the stage. It was time. The man spoke of the importance of community, of the projects funded by the night's donations, and finally, with a flourish, he introduced the soul of the event, the woman whose generous heart inspired them all, Veronica Sterling. Applause echoed through the ballroom as Veronica rose, a rehearsed smile on her lips. She walked toward the stage, the train of her gown gliding across the floor. Arthur watched her every step, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm in his chest. This was the moment, the point of no return. He looked around at the smiling, satisfied faces in the audience. They were his peers, his neighbors, the people with whom he shared this world of privilege. In a few minutes, he would break the unwritten code of their society: silence. He would expose the rot hiding beneath the glitter, the cruelty that dressed in silk. He felt a chill, not of fear, but of a strange and terrible clarity. He wasn't just fighting for his daughter. He was challenging an entire system, a world built on the fragile foundation of appearances. Veronica reached the microphone, took a deep breath, and began her speech, her smooth, melodic voice filling the hall. And Arthur, calmly, rose from his chair. "I'd like to begin tonight by talking about what it truly means to build a family." Veronica's voice, smooth and polished, floated through the hall, captivating the audience. She spoke of values, of the legacy we leave for our children, of the importance of a home being a sanctuary of love and safety. Every word was a masterpiece of hypocrisy, and Arthur felt each one as a personal insult. As she spoke, He walked slowly and deliberately toward the stage. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People glanced at each other, confused by this breach of protocol. Veronica saw him approaching, and a small frown of irritation creased her brow, but she held her smile. Assuming he wanted to add something to her speech, perhaps a public compliment to reinforce their image as the perfect couple. He climbed the steps to the stage and stood beside her. He took the second microphone from its stand, the metal cool in his hand. "Excuse me, darling," he said, his voice firm and clear, cutting through her speech. "You speak beautifully about family, but I'd like to show everyone what those words mean in practice. In our home." Veronica stared at him, her smile frozen on her face, her eyes now flashing with barely concealed panic. "Arthur, what are you doing?" she hissed, low enough for only him to hear. He didn't answer. Instead, he signaled to a technician at the back of the room. The house lights dimmed, and a large screen, which had been displaying the charity event's logo, descended behind them. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, heavy, charged with an almost unbearable expectation. Then, the first image appeared on the screen. It was his kitchen, bathed in morning light. The picture was sharp, the quality of the security camera impeccable, and then the sound, Veronica's voice, cold and cutting. "Bread is only for those who can walk." The audience let out a collective gasp as the bread was knocked to the floor. The following image of Leah dragging herself toward the food was a gut punch to everyone present. A sound of horror, a collective "oh" swept through the hall. Veronica turned as white as the marble in her kitchen. She tried to grab Arthur's arm, but he moved away. "She said bread was only for those who could walk," Arthur said into the microphone, his voice resonating with a contained pain that was more powerful than any shout. "But today, I understand. Bread isn't for those who can walk. Bread is for those who are hungry." He signaled the technician again. The video from the playroom began to roll. The doll on the high shelf, Leah's frustrated sobs, and the subtle, cruel smile on Veronica's face, magnified in high definition for all to see. "She called it strengthening her arms," Arthur continued. "I call it something else." Veronica tried to speak. "This is absurd. It's taken out of context." Arthur has been under a lot of stress. But her voice was drowned out by the shocked murmurs from the audience. No one was looking at her with sympathy. They were looking with disgust. The final image appeared on the screen. It wasn't a video, but a photo. A close-up of Veronica's journal, open to the page that read, "She is a smudge on the picture I am trying to paint." The elegant, unmistakable handwriting was the final signature on her condemnation. Arthur turned off the microphone. He didn't need to say anything more. The truth was there, exposed under the stage lights, naked, raw, and undeniable. The silence that settled over the hall was no longer one of expectation, but of judgment. The shimmer of Veronica's red dress, which had seemed so glamorous before, now looked like the color of shame. She stood there, isolated on the stage, the center of attention as she had always wished. But in the worst way imaginable. The light in her eyes was no longer of triumph, but the fragile glint of a world that had just shattered. The ballroom, once a stage for celebration, had transformed into a silent tribunal. The faces in the audience, which minutes before had displayed polished smiles and elegant boredom, were now masks of shock, disbelief, and in some, a cold anger. They were CEOs, heirs to great fortunes, people accustomed to controlling narratives and keeping skeletons locked firmly in gold-leafed closets. What Arthur had done was more than expose his wife. He had broken the elite's pact of silence, showing everyone that ugliness could exist even in the most beautiful of homes. Veronica remained motionless under the spotlight, the microphone forgotten in her hand. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her with the pallor of a wax statue. Her world, built so carefully on the pillars of image and status, had imploded in a matter of minutes. She looked at Arthur, not with anger, but with a desperate incomprehension, as if she couldn't process that the man she believed she controlled so well could have orchestrated her downfall so spectacularly and publicly. Arthur, with the calm of someone who has finally reached the eye of the storm, picked up the microphone again. His voice, however, no longer held the pain from before. There was a new strength in it, a clarity that came from truth. For 3 years, I was an absent father, hiding behind my work and my grief, he said, his gaze sweeping the crowd but not settling on anyone. I failed to protect the most important person in my life. I allowed my home, a place that should have been a source of safety and love, to become a stage for silent cruelty. He paused, letting the weight of his confession settle in the air. This night is not about revenge. It is about accountability. My accountability. He then turned slightly, his gaze meeting Veronica's. Our marriage ends here, not with shouting matches or tabloid scandals, but with the truth. I believe the greatest asset we can build is not in stocks or property, but in our capacity to be human. It was then that he made his final move. The image on the screen changed, replacing the journal page with the delicate, hopeful logo of the Wings of Bread Foundation, featuring Leah's drawing at its center. And that is why, starting today, my entire focus and a significant portion of my capital will be dedicated to this project. The Wings of Bread Institute, an organization created in my daughter Leah's name and dedicated to ensuring that no child ever feels invisible or unworthy. Dedicated to ensuring that bread, care, and dignity can fly to all who cannot reach them. A different sound began to ripple through the audience. It was no longer murmurs of shock, but of admiration. Arthur's gesture, turning a personal tragedy into a public mission, was something this audience, focused on profits and dividends, rarely witnessed. It was a display of power far more impressive than any show of wealth. Veronica, realizing there was nothing left to be said, no argument that could save her, did the only thing she had left. With what little dignity she could muster, she placed the microphone on its stand, turned and walked off the stage. She didn't run. She walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, head held high, but the shine of her dress seemed false. A borrowed light that no longer belonged to her. People parted to let her pass, no one daring to touch her or speak a word. Their stares were hard, cold, the silent judgment of a society she had worked so hard to conquer. The ballroom door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing her exile. And on the stage, under the image of a bread with wings, Arthur felt the weight of 3 years of guilt finally begin to lift. In the days that followed the gala, the story spread like wildfire. The press, initially cautious, soon dived into the narrative, fueled by anonymous witnesses from the event and the perfectly timed press release from the Wings of Bread Institute. The news split into 2 threads: the cruel stepmother scandal and the inspiring story of the father who turned his pain into a noble cause. Veronica vanished from social circles, her public image pulverized. The charities she was a patron of quietly removed her name from their boards. Her fall was as spectacular as her rise. A cautionary tale whispered in the city's cafes and salons. Arthur, however, refused to participate in the public lynching. He gave a single interview in which he focused exclusively on the Foundation's mission, never once mentioning Veronica's name. Their divorce was handled discreetly and swiftly by his lawyers, closing that chapter of his life with a dignity he felt was necessary, especially for Leah. The biggest change, however, occurred within the walls of his home. The silence, once oppressive and heavy, was replaced by a new lightness. Arthur took an extended leave from his companies, delegating the management of his vast fortune to his trusted subordinates. His priority was now different. He and Leah began to build a new routine based on the small things that had been neglected. They ate breakfast together every day at the kitchen table, the same table where Leah had once been forbidden to sit. They spent afternoons in the garden planting flowers, or in the living room building block castles. Arthur relearned how to laugh, a sound he himself had forgotten he possessed. Clara remained with them, no longer as a frightened assistant, but as part of their new, small family, a warm and comforting presence. Arthur's promise to care for her and her family was kept, giving her a financial security that freed her from fear forever. The house began to change physically as well. Veronica's cold, impersonal study was transformed into a therapy and rehabilitation room for Leah, with colorful equipment and the guidance of the best specialists Arthur's money could hire. Leah's progress was slow but steady. She began to gain strength in her legs, and more importantly, a confidence began to sparkle in her eyes that Arthur had never seen. The girl who once communicated in whispers now chattered about her drawings, the flowers in the garden, and the bread with wings she continued to draw, now in vibrant colors. One day, while they were in the new therapy room, Leah was holding onto two parallel bars, trying to take a few steps. Arthur was kneeling a few feet away, encouraging her with a smile. She looked at him, her brow furrowed in concentration, and then let go of one bar, reaching her hand out toward him. "Daddy," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Bread." Arthur felt tears well up in his eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or guilt, but of a joy so pure and overwhelming it hurt. He understood. She wasn't asking for food. It was their code, a word that had been redefined. Bread now meant love, safety, home. He crawled on his knees to her, took her small hand and kissed it. "Yes, my love," he whispered. "The bread is ours, all of it." In that moment, he knew that healing was happening, not just for Leah, but for him too. The wealth he had amassed, the businesses he had built, all of it paled in comparison to the feeling of that small hand holding his. He had finally found the true meaning of his net worth, not in figures, but in the ability to rebuild a broken world for his daughter. A year later, the morning sun streamed through the same tall kitchen windows, but the light felt different. It was warmer, softer, as if the house itself had heaved a long sigh of relief. The aroma in the air wasn't just of fresh bread, but of pancakes, made by Arthur with a newfound skill, and of Leah's laughter, a sound that was now the background music of their home. Seated at the table, in a high chair that put her at the perfect height, Leah swung her legs, which now wore small, colorful braces decorated with stickers of winged bread. She didn't run, but she walked with a proud determination, each step a testament to her resilience. The Wings of Bread Institute had become a national force, a model of effective philanthropy that was already helping hundreds of children. Arthur was no longer seen as the reclusive billionaire, but as a father who had turned his pain into purpose, inspiring other families to break the silence about the invisible abuse that happens behind closed doors. That morning, Arthur placed a plate of pancakes in front of Leah. She picked up her fork firmly and cut a piece, bringing it to her mouth with a satisfied smile. "Daddy," she said, her mouth full, "remember the bread on the floor." Arthur stopped what he was doing and looked at her, his heart tightening, not with pain, but with admiration for her courage to revisit that memory. "I remember, my love. I remember every day." "It didn't fly that day," she said, with the simple, profound logic of a child, "because it was sad. But now," she pointed with her fork at the pancakes, "now the food smiles." Arthur felt his eyes well up. His daughter's ability to reframe trauma, to transform it into a narrative of overcoming, was the greatest lesson he had ever learned. He sat down beside her and took her hand. "You're right. And you know why? Because you made it smile. You walk right here," he said, touching his own chest, over his heart. Leah beamed, a smile that lit up her entire face. "You too, Daddy. You walk here too." In that moment, their exchange encapsulated everything. Their journey hadn't been about learning to walk, but about learning to feel. About understanding that true strength wasn't in one's legs, but in the ability to connect, to empathize, to turn pain into love. Arthur looked around the kitchen, at the light dancing on the cabinets, at Leah's drawings held by magnets on the refrigerator, at his daughter's radiant face. He had spent his entire life accumulating a fortune, building an empire of assets and businesses, measuring his success in profitability charts. But true wealth, he now understood, was this. It was the simplicity of a sunny morning, the taste of a shared pancake, the sound of a loved one's laughter. It was a net worth that couldn't be counted in dollars or Bitcoin, but that held infinite value. He was no longer just a father, he was a sanctuary, and together they had learned to fly.